Hey, folks, you're listening to the free version of the Ring of Fire Radio podcast. It's free, but it's not free to make. In fact, our podcast exists and our radio program is on air because of our members. Our members support this program each week by heading over to rofpodcast.com, signing up to become a member of the show. You can too. What you get in return is a couple more hours of content and access to all of our archives. Look, independent media is under assault. Corporate media dominates. You know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That's why you listen to the Ring of Fire Radio podcast. But if you want to hear what you're missing and you want to make sure that we can stay on the air, head over to rofpodcast.com. Sign up to become a member. You can do a monthly or annual subscription. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Ring of Fire Radio. I'm Sam Seder. Today on Ring of Fire Radio, the Iron Stache, Randy Bryce, joins us to discuss his race against Paul Ryan, what struggles working-class Americans face in the midterm elections. Journalist Ivy Olison will tell us what she learned when she went undercover to a boot camp for young conservatives. Heather Digby Parton from Salon.com will be here to run down the most important news stories from the past week. And Esquire magazine's very own Charlie Pierce will be here to explain why Roy Moore is exactly what Republicans are all about and why he thinks the Alabama senatorial candidate not going anywhere anytime soon. Don't forget, you can go to rofpodcast.com and sign up for the free 1-hour version of the Ring of Fire Radio podcast. And if you want the full show without commercials, become a member. That's the best way to support this show. That's rofpodcast.com. Here to help me run down some of the biggest headlines of the week, Heather Parton from Salon, or as you may know her, Digby. So, Digby, another sort of bonkers week in the Trump era, not exactly having to do with Trump on some level. We got a slight vacation because he was thousands of miles away. We'll talk more about that later in the program. But speaking of more, the big story this week, of course, has been Roy Moore running for Senate in Alabama. There's now at least 7 women who have come out and told stories ranging about him from, to be fair, decades ago, ranging from an attempted assault to just inappropriate sexual behavior. But the sort of fine point on this, of course, is that these women were all in their teens. So one was 14, others 16, 17. A woman told a story this week of getting a phone call while she's in high school, being brought down to the principal's office, getting on the phone, saying hello, and on the other line was Roy Moore, the DA. He asked, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm in the middle of trigonometry class." I mean, these are stunning charges, and yet we have seen sort of a mix of reaction across the sort of right-wing spectrum. I don't know how much of it is sincere, but just give me your broad strokes on this.
Well, first of all, just let me say absolutely that, I think this guy obviously is he's committed assault on underage minors. There's just too much evidence. These women seem completely credible to me. They are not political people. Some of them are Republicans who voted for Donald Trump, which says something. And you know, I mean, these are not that this. There's nothing about this that appears to be some kind of a setup in any way. This was just reporting that came through. People went down there, started talking. Obviously, once they started digging into it, you know, it bubbled up to the surface. And Roy Moore has been a fixture in Alabama politics for 40 years, and you know, he very clearly said, at least to one of the women, made a very explicit threat. I'm the law and you're a child. No one will believe you. And I'm sure that that is exactly what kept all these women quiet. If I'd have been in their position, I wouldn't have said anything either. This guy was a very powerful man in that town. Later, a very powerful man in Alabama. He was the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court twice. And he was considered a religious icon. He was an avatar of, you know, conservative Christian morals. I mean, who would come out and do this? And I think probably at any other time it would have been, they knew that that the women knew that their lives would be ruined. And this is the only point, and not just maybe, absolutely, because of the whole atmosphere of women coming forward and the fact that this was a big national race and that there was maybe some protection in that it would get a lot of publicity and therefore would protect some of these women, that they felt comfortable saying what had happened to them. So having said all that and absolutely believing that this happened, and let me just say one more thing. I mean, you know, I was a teenager in the 1970s myself, and let me tell you something. It was a permissive time.
Right.
But the fact that the people at the mall all said, watch out for this guy, and I mean, to me, that tells you everything. If there was anything even mildly appropriate about it, the late 1970s would have been a period where people would have shrugged, and they didn't. They went, ugh, you know, there was something really gross about the way he was behaving. People saw it. They were wanting to protect girls from it. So, you know, that's another factor in there that I absolutely believe was true, that
contemporaneous,
there was something really gross about, yeah.
There was a contemporaneous, almost like quasi-institutional alarm bells went off. I mean, you know, I don't want to call the mall an institution, but it's not like, you know, this is a community that's recognizing there's a problem with this guy. And
exactly. And it's a community where a lot of teenagers hang out, and that they were, you know, at that time, I think the mall was probably the only place that teens could go to, you know, kind of hang on a Friday night or whatever. And there were a lot of teenagers working in the stores around there. The fact that these store owners and various, you know, security guards and people like that were aware of him and were actually warning people, that says a lot. And knowing, too, that he was, remember, I mean, he was the assistant district attorney at the time. This guy isn't just some dude. I mean, he's, you know, the law, and he was doing this stuff. So having said all that, I also have to mention the fact that, you know, this is happening on a political level in a very, very interesting way, because everybody will remember that Judge Roy Moore was endorsed by Steve Bannon, the man who is threatening to blow up the world and who is very explicitly going after the Republican establishment.
Right.
And Roy Moore was opposed strongly by Mitch McConnell and the Republican establishment in Washington, who even got Donald Trump to reluctantly endorse Moore's rival in the primary. Right. Luther Strange. So that political overlay, I mean, the Democrats are really kind of out of it in this, other than that they have a pretty good candidate there who, if this whole thing unfolds the way it should, he might actually take the seat, which would be shocking. But for a Democrat to do it, but he's not bad. I mean, he prosecuted the KKK. You know, I mean, he's for an Alabama Democrat. I'm not sure you can do much better than that, or at least a white Alabama Democrat. So, you know, this political story is kind of a microcosm of what's happening in the Republican Party in general. I mean, this is part of their, I don't even know, it's chaos, really. And so you've got Bannon and, of course, Trump, who really did like Moore. He got sort of talked into endorsing his rival against his will. I think it was a deal he made with McConnell. Well, okay, you know, I'll do it. And he clearly said in his big rally for Luther Strange, he said out loud, maybe I made a mistake, you know, and went and the next day deleted all of his tweets on his Twitter feed that had endorsed Strange and came out strongly for Roy Moore. So, and then of course you have this whole the next level of this, which is that Donald Trump himself was accused by 20 women of assault and harassment, and yet won and bragged on tape about it, and just won his election a year ago, which is something that has everybody thinking, just can Moore get away with it? What's Trump going to say about it? And notably, he said nothing about it. He's, at least up to a certain point during the week, he went 12 days at a minimum.
And literally, he had a press conference that he ran away from. But look, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the implications of Roy Moore relative to the tax vote. We also got to talk about, at the very least, maybe not necessarily in the context of Roy Moore, but also accusations against Senator Al Franken that came out this week, and broadly speaking, why we're seeing this in society in a way that we haven't seen. It's not like this type of sexual harassment just started against women. So we'll talk about all those things when we get back. I'm Sam Seder. I'm talking to the great Heather Parton. We'll be right back. Ring of Fire Radio.
Close your eyes and clone yourself. Build your heart an army to defend your innocence while you do everything wrong. Don't be scared to walk alone. Don't be scared to lie.
Folks, the Ring of Fire is sponsored by JustCoffee.coop. That's JustCoffee.coop. If you like fair trade, delicious coffee, tea, or chocolate, head over to JustCoffee.coop. Use the coupon code MAJORITY and get 10% off. There's free shipping. You have no reason not to get this great coffee. It's a great outfit in Madison, Wisconsin, which supported the protests there. JustCoffee.coop. Welcome back to Ring of Fire Radio. I'm Sam Seder here with Heather Digby Parton from Salon. So, Heather, when we broke, we were laying down sort of the basics of the Roy Moore story, which is that there have been more accusations this week of Roy Moore's behavior years ago in Alabama, specifically as it relates to inappropriate and sometimes what I think would be called assault of teenage girls. And the fracturing we're seeing in the Republican Party and their response to this. I mean, Mitch McConnell, forgive me for being so cynical, but Mitch McConnell came out and said, I believe the women, and, Roy Moore should step down. And I can't help but think that's because Mitch McConnell also coincidentally doesn't want Roy Moore in the Senate. Now, maybe he's a little more woke than I give him credit for, but I'm skeptical about this. But I also don't understand how this works. I mean, presumably they need his vote if they don't pass tax reform before the end of this year. But on some level, it seems like maybe McConnell is using this as a way of forcing his Senate caucus to push tax reform through by basically saying, like, it's now or never.
Well, I hadn't thought of that, but that does make sense. I've been wondering the same thing. I mean, I know McConnell does not want to go into 2018 with Judge Roy Moore as an albatross around the Republican Party's neck. But hey, they've got Donald Trump around their neck. I don't know how much worse Roy Moore makes it for them. He just kind of, adds to the general view of the Republican Party, voting for sexual harasser assaulters. So I don't know how that
Moore
really
could lose too. I mean, I still tend to think that he's going to win this race. I mean, it is Alabama after all. I have no idea what kind of campaign Doug Jones is running, but I can't imagine there was a huge amount of resources in his campaign 3 or 4 weeks ago, right? I mean, Alabama is not the place you run and anticipate a Democrat to win. So, I mean, but there is a possibility Doug Jones could win, and it seems to me that would make a tax reform vote that much harder.
Oh, absolutely, it would make it harder. I mean, any loss of any vote for Mitch McConnell is a problem, and one assumes that Doug Jones would, I guess I have to assume that he would not vote with McConnell on such a thing, or do the switch to the Republican Party, which has happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact Richard Shelby was elected as a Democrat, and the senior senator from Alabama, he was originally elected as a Democrat and then switched to the Republican Party. I think it was '94. But that, this is a different time. I mean, this is a wave going the other way, not going towards the Republicans. So I wouldn't expect that to happen. I don't know. I think what you say may be the case. It may be that McConnell is telling all these guys, look, this is it. We have this freak down in Alabama. Win or lose, we're screwed one way or the other. You get it through now. And that this is what has to be done. So just push this tax reform through. And they are treating this like it's life or death. I mean, this is right up there. It's a declaration of war. They have to pass it in their view. And, as the House passed the bill, with, by the way, I just have to point out, a bunch of California Republicans voted for it. And I hope they enjoy their new jobs working as lobbyists, because they're not going to be in the House of Representatives after 2018. That was a suicidal vote they took on behalf of Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy. That they're not going to survive that here, because it was basically that entire tax bill was a big FU to California and New York, and people are not going to forget it. So anyway,
we should explain why that's the case. It's because there is they get rid of, for the most part, the deductions for state and local taxes. There is some exemption for the first $10,000 worth of property taxes, but these are states in Illinois and New Jersey, other ones where the state charges taxes because they provide a lot of services, and this was an attempt to basically punish these blue states.
Right, and presented in some weird, in fact, the whole argument around this tax bill. It should have been a rebellion by every Republican in a big blue state, because there's been a tremendous amount of dishonesty about the idea that somehow or another the blue states were taking advantage of the red states.
Right.
And this was a matter of redistributing wealth more fairly, and it's the exact opposite. So California Republicans, they were weak here anyway, but I think they may be going extinct after this one. I was really surprised that they did it, to be honest. I know Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, is a powerful guy financially, but California is the heart of Blue America, and I really honestly don't think they're going to last because of this. They were already in trouble, and
Indeed.
I think they're definitely in trouble now.
Well, look, we got to take a break here in a moment, but if you'll stick with us for the next hour, we have more to say about Roy Moore, and particularly we have more to say about this tax plan. We also got to address the fact that a woman accused Senator Al Franken, of groping her and attempting to, or kissing her in an inappropriate manner on a USO tour about 10 or so years ago. We will talk about that in the next hour as well, plus a lot more in the news. My name is Sam Cedar. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be back with Heather Parton in the next hour. Ring of Fire will be back in just a moment. Coming up, Army veteran, union worker, and cancer survivor Randy Bryce will be here to tell us how he plans to take on Paul Ryan in his home district. I'm Sam Cedar. You're listening to Ring of Fire Radio. Hey folks, Mike Papantonio's new book entitled Law and Vengeance, which is the follow-up to his critically acclaimed novel Law and Disorder, is finally out and available to you to buy. The book is a legal and political thriller drawing on Pap's experience both as a skilled trial lawyer and as a nationally syndicated political talk show host. The story follows trial lawyer Gina Romano, who was first introduced in Law and Disorder, on her quest for both vengeance and justice in a whistleblower lawsuit against a weapons manufacturer who developed and sold a dangerously defective rifle scope. Pap has built a story around real-life events that he's encountered as one of the top trial lawyers in America, where he's been fighting some of the world's largest and most corrupt corporations. Buy Mike Papantonio's new book, Law and Vengeance, today. Go to www.lawandvengeance.com. That's lawandvengeance.com. Check it out. I know you're going to love it. Welcome back to Ring of Fire Radio. I'm Sam Seder. Earlier this year, Army vet and union worker Randy Bryce made headlines when he announced that he would run against Paul Ryan for Congress in Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District. Here to tell us how he plans to do it, how he can help America's working class, Randy Bryce. So, Randy, I know this is probably a question that you get quite a bit as you travel through your district, your home, but give folks a sense of why you're running.
Well, I'm a lifelong resident of the area, and especially recently, things have just gotten to the point. I mean, workers have been under attack in the state since Governor Walker has been elected, and now it's being exported to the federal level with everything that's going on with Donald Trump. Paul Ryan being in Congress, he's not just a member of Congress, he's the Speaker of the House. And I'm seeing exactly the same thing that decimated our state happening to the country, the rest of the country. All these things that are taking place where people are working harder and harder, and we're having less and less to show for it. And I mean, just to look at this recent tax bill that they're trying to push on us, which is, I just saw it's going to take right off the bat. The CBO score came out a little while ago, $25 billion for Medicare for a year. And it's just ridiculous. Our country's turned into it's like in favor of corporations instead of workers. And working people we need to have one of our own making decisions for us.
Give us a sense of Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District. Paul Ryan's been there for now almost 20 years, I guess 17 years. But give us a sense of the district and whether or not it's changed in that time for folks who aren't familiar with Wisconsin's 1st.
The people have been the same. We've been hardworking people that, get up, pack a lunch, go to work, do our best, come back, and we're proud of what we do. It used to be a manufacturing center. We had a lot of, United Auto Workers were big, and they still are, but now it's just the retirees that are involved because there's a huge GM abandoned plant in Janesville in Paul Ryan's backyard. They're still finishing demolition of a large plant in Kenosha as well. And so the jobs are gone, and jobs keep leaving instead of actually bringing jobs here, good-paying jobs that we can support ourselves with. That's all going away. And so now there's a lot of other jobs that have to do with warehouses. Amazon, they built a big distribution center, and it doesn't pay or have the benefits the same as the other auto worker jobs did. So people are struggling to make ends meet, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs.
I mean, how is it that Paul Ryan, I know that he did in the last election, he got reelected somewhat easily. I mean, what do you think accounts for that?
He hasn't had a serious competitor since he's been in. And I've worked to support whoever ran against him since I've been very involved, at least the last decade. But he hasn't had, the last person that ran didn't raise much money. I don't know if it was $25,000 or $35,000 for the entire cycle. But nobody's really challenged him. And people are recognizing that shine that he had of, he wants to do good for the district. Even though I never disagreed with him, I didn't find him to be personally, on a personable level, he comes across as a nice guy, but the policies are what's they're going to kill us. And he hasn't had competition. And this is Congressman Mark Buchanan called our race the first time he's going to have to fight for his job.
I mean, how do people in Wisconsin's first, I mean, when they hear that Paul Ryan has, for years, it seems like, tried to push through an agenda that involves cutting Medicare and Medicaid, cutting Social Security, when they hear stuff like he said it was, I think I'm paraphrasing, but it was a dream of his in college sitting around a keg, and they're thinking about how they're going to cut taxes for corporations. I mean, is it that folks back in Wisconsin see one side of him and they're not aware of what he's doing in Washington, or what is it that accounts for that?
That's pretty much it. When he's in the district, he comes across as a Democrat. I watched a debate that he had with Rob Zerban a few years ago, and my jaw just hit the floor. I was like, what he was telling the public is not what he's actually doing when he's in Washington, D.C. with his voucher care system. And nobody has done more to destroy the most successful programs in our history, Social Security and Medicaid. Nobody's done more to destroy them than Paul Ryan. And he comes across trying to make claim that he's doing what he's doing to save them. Well, the version that he's trying to turn it into, whether it's privatizing it and allowing them to Wall Street to gamble with our money, or if there's just going to be so little left that he's going to consider that any kind of a program at all, it's ridiculous to listen to what he says and then actually pay attention to, well, when he did vote, he doesn't vote now as speaker, which is, that's fine. That's been a traditional thing. But he still determines what legislation gets talked about, and he still pushes the most horrible anti-worker agenda that I've seen, that I can remember.
Yeah, I wonder, and you're a union guy, and I want to talk a little bit about just your background in a bit, and I also want to talk about what took place this week when Bernie Sanders sat down with you and endorsed you. But before we get that, you mentioned Paul Ryan's assault on workers, and we know that he was supportive, obviously, of Donald Trump getting into office. And one of the first things, and probably one of the few things that Donald Trump has been able to accomplish, is to put anti-worker, anti-consumer in many respects, judges onto the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. One of the cases the Supreme Court is going to hear coming up this year is a court case known as Janus. It is going to seriously undermine public sector unions. Give me your perspective on this. I mean, do people draw the line between support for Paul Ryan and what is going to happen to public sector unions in this country?
Well, the Scott Walker and these extremist Republicans that he came into office with, they've done a really good job of trying to paint public sector workers as part of a problem. And that's been the whole strategy of not just within the state, but within the entire country, is this divide and conquer baloney, that they don't, instead of looking at us, I mean, we're the ones, we build the country, we maintain it, we take care of it, and we're seen as the problem. And I remember a time back before Scott Walker was elected, and when people just did their jobs, we took pride in what we did, and we wouldn't have been outraged. We liked what we did. We had a good way of life, and now we're under attack, and we're seen as the problem. So it's been Donald Trump, and it's kind of scary seeing Paul Ryan not do anything to stand up for him. He made some comment not too long ago that anything he would do to speak up against Donald Trump would just slow down the process, and he doesn't realize that that's Congress's job, is to be one of the checks and balances, and not a partner in crime with what's going on.
All right, well, listen, we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about your background. You have, I would not say that you are someone who has taken a straight line towards becoming a congressional candidate by any stretch of the imagination. And I want to talk about what the implications are of having someone like Bernie Sanders come in and endorse you, because he is one of the most popular politicians in the country, if not the most popular politician in the country. And, of course, there's a lot of not just young people, but people who care about labor, or people who care about social justice, care about economic justice, who have been supportive of Bernie Sanders, and they often take his cue. So we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. I'm talking to Randy Bryce. He is the Democrat going to be running against Paul Ryan in Wisconsin's 1st congressional district. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back. We're back on Ring of Fire Radio. I'm Sam Seder. Right now I'm talking with the Iron Stache, Randy Bryce, who's running for Wisconsin's 1st congressional district against Paul Ryan. So, Randy, when we broke, we were talking about Paul Ryan and his relationship to Donald Trump, and, of course, all the things that, and we should say, you know, you brought up Scott Walker, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's going on in Wisconsin. But we should say, you know, it's not just that Paul Ryan is supportive of Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of implications about Donald Trump that people are worried about. But there's also this hard right agenda that attacks our Medicare, attacks our Social Security, attacks union workers and workers broadly speaking, labor broadly speaking. I want to get to that. But before we do, I had mentioned in the last segment that you haven't exactly taken a straight line to running for Congress. Tell folks a little bit about yourself, because you seem to have dealt with in your life a set of problems that I think is indicative of a broad cross-section of people in this country, and problems that you don't hear, that don't get the attention that one would hope.
Right. Born and raised in southeastern Wisconsin. After I graduated from high school, I attended public schools my whole life. I enlisted in the Army, was stationed at Fort Bragg, spent part of the time in Honduras and Central America this was like the mid-'80s when Reagan was president, and the Sandinistas were in Nicaragua, and all that was going on. And I got out. I worked with homeless vets, was one of my first jobs. And then I saw how different it is, like from wearing the uniform and being called a hero and things of that nature, to once we take the uniform off, seeing how many of our soldiers get treated. And at the time, 60% of the homeless population was made up of veterans. And it was really eye-opening to try to get these men back on their feet and just go about getting them resources through the government. You would think that the government would be more easily accessible to get them help. But then after that, I worked 2 jobs at a time. I had like 2 full-time jobs. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. I didn't have any insurance through any of the jobs that I was working at. And so I lucked out, and I got sent I was like a guinea pig for a while through the Medical College of Wisconsin. And it turned out I had a really great doctor. But then, there was stuff after that I had to get checked. I had like a lymph node dissection. And so basically they cut me open down the middle to check for cancer traveling through my system. And there was stuff after the fact too that I had to go through. So here I am, no insurance, but yet I served in the Army, and facing cancer. It was a pretty scary time. But then eventually my mom worked for a doctor, and one of their patients was a retired apprenticeship coordinator for Ironworkers Local 8. And she knew I was looking for a good job. So I put my application in, and I was accepted, went through the apprenticeship, and got my journeyman's book. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years. And it's one of those jobs that you just actually love doing. Once you do it, you can't see yourself doing anything else. And I would have kept doing that too. But, Scott Walker got elected, so I got involved locally with the Democratic Party. Much more so, I was the volunteer political coordinator for my local union. And then people had seen me step up and become more active within the labor movement locally. and also stepping up for veterans' rights. I'm the president for the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce. It's a new organization, and in our second year, we're able to put on a full-time executive director. But basically, I've been running around. People have been calling me up saying, "Randy, can you help us here? Can you help us there?" And I try to help as many people as I possibly can. And so recently this year, after the election, people, it was specifically an immigrant rights group, Voces de la Frontera, that contacted me talking about people being terrified that Donald Trump was president now, after referring to Mexicans as rapists and murderers. And they're worried about their families being ripped apart. So I became more involved with that aspect right after the election. And then as time came on, people were seeing what was going on in Washington, D.C., and seeing that we really can't let things go the way that they are. We need to get control back for our own sake before, once that cart rolls over the cliff, we're done. And we're getting pretty close to the edge now. But people had become, they said that my name kept coming up as far as somebody that could take on Paul Ryan. And they know that I've been very outspoken in my beliefs, and that I've stood tall whenever I do take a stance. So after some persuading, I decided to throw my hat in the ring. I was asked at a May Day parade where tens of thousands of immigrants are marching in the street, standing up for their families to be allowed to stay together, that I was asked by a state senator. And this was after being approached by the Working Families Party, that I said, yes, I definitely will get in. And it's not something I ever wanted to do, to run for Congress, but it's something I feel I have to do. And I know nobody's going to have the amount of commitment that I have, my inner drive to get this done.
And like I said, this week you were endorsed by Bernie Sanders. What does that mean to you in your campaign?
Well, Bernie Sanders is, when he was running for president, it was so amazing for me to see somebody go and walk on picket lines. And that's somebody, because that's something I do. And that's one of the things that I get called up. They're like, hey, our contracts it's not going to go. It's not going to go good. And can you help us? Because we might go on strike. So whether it was the Kohler strike up north, I helped raise hundreds of dollars around Christmas time for the families there, because the people are on strike. And, you're not thinking about toys for the kids, but it's stuff that's important to me. And Bernie Sanders has stood very tall and very loudly on issues that affect working people. So, I was called to, I was invited to speak at his rally before the primary in Wisconsin. And just the phone call itself I was on a construction site working on a 35-story building in downtown Milwaukee at lunchtime, and I get a phone call to go speak at a presidential rally.
Wow.
And that said a lot to me, just what kind of person he was, what he stood for. He's all about people, and especially the big issue, Medicare for all. That's something I'm very passionate about, and especially after having gone through cancer without having any kind of insurance. So it means a lot. It really means everything to me.
We got about a minute left. What would be your message? How can people help if they're listening around the country? Obviously, your race has a lot of attention because you're running against the Speaker of the House. And folks in Wisconsin and your district, I imagine, want somebody who's going to fight for things like Medicare for all, basically
right.
Save Medicaid and Medicare in and of itself. What can people do? Is there a website people can go to, or how can they get involved?
There is. RandyBryceForCongress.com, all spelled out. On Twitter, it's Iron Stache, and we also have a Facebook page. And we're bringing in a lot of money. It's all in small amounts, like $28 per contribution. The funds coming in is just amazing. And if you aren't in a position to toss a couple of bucks, please help spread the word. That means everything.
I imagine there's some guys who used to work on the construction sites who are going out and knocking on some doors for you.
Absolutely. And people from around the country have been calling and asking if we're doing that yet, and if so, when can they come up and knock doors? So there's a lot of interest, not just in the district, but all around, the people that want to come help take out Paul Ryan.
Randy Bryce, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Randy Bryce is an Army veteran, union worker, and cancer survivor. You can learn more about his campaign to beat Paul Ryan at randybryceforcongress.com. When we come back, Heather Digby Parton will join us to analyze more news from the past week. That's just ahead. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. Don't forget, rofpodcast.com to support the show and hear what you're missing.